All right. So we'll just give folks a moment to filter in. All, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really excited to have you here. We're just going to give folks a moment to filter in from the Zoom holding room. All right. Thank you again. It will just be another moment before we get started. Well, thank you for tuning in tonight for the latest installment of our S.T.O.P RadTech series. I'm Albert Fox Cahn. I'm the executive director of the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project, and really delighted to present today's discussion on worker surveillance in the age of COVID. And we have an incredible panel here for this discussion. This is a session that is put on by the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project, which is a New York-based privacy and civil rights group, and RadTech, which is the monthly meetup group. And our panel tonight is composed of Ryan Gerety, a researcher at United for Respect, who works with organizers and grassroots activists to understand and respond to the technological acceleration of structural inequality. Strea Sanchez, an organizer at United for Respect and formerly a warehouse worker at Amazon for 2 years. And Frank Kearl, a staff attorney at Make the Road New York, based in Staten Island, New York. His legal work focuses on labor rights, including advocacy on behalf of Amazon warehouse workers. So, one of the most important parts of this conversation, of course, will be getting your questions from the audience, hearing the things that are, top of mind for you when you think of the way that people are being surveilled within the workplace, the ways that this is changing the power balance between workers and supervisors. And this is something that obviously predated COVID-19, but has been deeply accelerated by the pandemic. And so I want to start on that note, and just go around, ask everyone sort of the way that you think workplace surveillance has been most transformed in recent months, in recent years. Happy to start with anyone, always willing to cold call if necessary. But who wants to kick us off with the ways that you've seen the surveillance landscape in workplaces shift most radically recently? And I will. Oh, perfect. Well, let's start with Ryan and then Strea.
Great. And thanks, Albert, for hosting this conversation. And hi, everyone on the live stream and here with us. Very excited to have this conversation with Frank and Strea. I would say, there's been an acceleration of digital surveillance in the workplace going back to the 90s, where call center workers were targeted. And of course, there's a much longer history of efforts for employers to monitor and control the bodies of workers and toward squeezing profits. What we've seen over these last 2 years, really, is that corporations like Amazon, other large corporate employers have taken advantage of the pandemic to dramatically expand. And so you have models of worker surveillance like we see at Amazon, where they were able to outcompete other retailers by forcing their workers to work faster by watching them. And so, that model has expanded because Amazon has dramatically expanded. Other retailers struggling to keep up in the pandemic have started to adopt similar models. We've seen, Walmart adopt smartphones, and they've said the apps are to make their associates more productive. And so we see the growth of these models. And then even during the pandemic, you can see that the way that workplace surveillance is used, which is often punitive, especially for low-wage workers, was just repeated during the pandemic. So Amazon installed these cameras to monitor for social distancing, and immediately they used it punitively to discipline people and then eventually fire them, and then to retaliate against people who are organizing. And I'll save more of the Amazon stuff for my other colleagues, but that's sort of, I think, the overall frame.
Yeah, they're all such important themes. And Strea, saw that you had started to unmute earlier as well.
Yeah, I was kind of gonna say, more or less the same thing that Ryan did. We see a lot of cases where Amazon is using surveillance to punish people instead of what it was originally used for. They had the cameras that would, show people if they were too close together, and instead of saying, hey, you need to separate or step back or whatever, instead people were being fired over it, written up. It wasn't really used for the purpose of keeping people safe. It just kind of fell into their, I don't know what to call it better than, I guess, their want to fire people because it's just not a stable workplace. And having everybody under surveillance all the time really gives them the ability to control what everybody's doing. And that's really harmful. It causes a lot of anxiety and stress and a lot of problems for people who are just trying to work and do the very best that they can.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. I think that, it's become increasingly prevalent among workspaces. And I think Amazon is a particularly bad actor, but I think they're also sort of the canary in the coal mine. I think there's going to be a expansion of these programs and surveillance systems into other workplaces. And we're already seeing it now with delivery service providers, the sort of like independent third parties that are contracted by Amazon to do last mile delivery. All those folks have to use Amazon applications to track their location, to track their speed. So that control is taken over by a party that isn't even technically your employer. But I think the money that Amazon is spending to develop these systems is in part just to continue to squeeze more productivity out of people to the point where bodies actually start to break down. But then also, I think they see this as a potential way to monetize. A new branch of Amazon will be selling these tools to other employers to be able to use. So I think that when we hear stories about Amazon spending millions of dollars to develop this AI distance assist surveillance system to help maintain social distancing, they're not doing that because they are worried about COVID-19. There are a lot of other things that they could do to protect workers from COVID-19 that wouldn't cost them however many millions of dollars to develop them. So I think they're spending that money, they're investing those resources because they see this as a growth industry, which is really scary, and why it's really important that we understand it now and kind of nip it in the bud if at all possible.
And it seems like right now some of the examples are pretty disturbing of how this technology is being used. But that's obviously not the sales pitch we get for when it's first rolled out. Could you tell us a bit about some of the narratives you hear used to justify surveillance in the workplace, and just how those keep coming up short?
Yeah, I was going to say that as people have started to work from home and we're seeing more monitoring software being sold, you just hear this like, well, we need to make sure people are doing their work. We want to check in with workers. It's the same sort of like, we're sort of enhancing productivity, or we're just making sure like the bad apples, whatever. And that's kind of the same story that Amazon would tell, and Strea knows this better, where it's like, no, like nothing, it's not punitive. We're not injuring people. We're just like making sure everyone's doing their job. And so you sort of see, we know what happens at Amazon. They have double the injury rate and double the turnover. Workers describe like anxiety, depression, wanting to quit. And then you look at office workers and you're like, this is what's going to happen, because it's going to be used punitively. If you're monitored every second and they're making sure you're doing your work, like that sort of only ends one way, when you give the employer all the power.
And I really do think that theme of power is just so central to this, that surveillance is a way to centralize control, to centralize authority, and to really strip people of autonomy. Straight, I just was hoping you could expand a bit on what you were talking about earlier about the impact that has on people to know that they're constantly being watched. I feel like all too often we hear that sort of being written off as, oh, why does privacy matter? But we really know that it's very different when you're talking about the lived experience of being under that surveillance.
It really is. And, one of the things that I hear a lot from people is, well, Amazon's just trying to make sure that there's not theft of their products. And in the FC that I worked at, we had all these cameras that were outside of the aisles, and they didn't reach down into the aisles where we would be picking or stowing. And so people could very easily, I'm sure, take things out of there and not be seen by the cameras. What the cameras were there for was to watch everything that was going on, to make sure people weren't, time thefting or whatever. And it really did cause people a lot of stress. There's people who felt like they were constantly under surveillance, constantly being watched, where everything that they did was going to be scrutinized because they were not somebody that was liked by management or somebody that they had it out for. And it really enacts a lot of stress and paranoia. And I'm not sure it can be considered paranoia, honestly, because they really are watching for infractions, which is really sad. And you never know, there's so many cameras everywhere. You don't know if you're being watched or somebody else is being watched. And so you constantly have to watch yourself and monitor what you're doing, which gets really tiresome. It's exhausting after 10 hours of that in a day. It causes a lot of mental health issues and depression and many other things due to that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people just don't understand, like, the as a neurological reality, when you're constantly monitoring every aspect of how you go about a task, that hyper self-awareness, that's toxic. That it has a huge strain. And Frank, I'd love to come to you next, because listening to all of this, I think a lot of people would ask, how can this be legal? Like, it sounds like abuse. It sounds like something that is dangerous. But it also seems like something that a lot of companies are getting away with.
Yeah. I mean, I'll add also, just real quick before we jump into this sort of legality of it. In addition to the emotional toll, I mean, we all saw the news cycle around, urinating into bottles and things like that. I mean, there's a physical toll too. Repetitive motion injuries, you don't have time to stretch, you don't have time to go to, to seek first aid from medical care on site, you can't go to the bathroom. So in addition to that, like, psychological toll, the physical toll on, the human body is pretty extreme. So, when it gets to like the legality, I think one of the big issues is that a lot of our laws were written for a time that predates the use of a lot of these surveillance technologies. And there's not a lot of new laws coming off the conveyor belt out of Washington. Some states and municipalities are doing a better job of trying to keep up. But I think really the strategy that's been used has been this kind of whack-a-mole. you see a problem arise and then you try to respond to it with the law. We haven't really seen a prophylactic approach to this kind of technology in the form of policy that prevents or requires companies to demonstrate that there are not problems before implementing these types of technologies in the workplace. So I think the law is always kind of playing catch up. And when you're trying to play catch up with a company like Amazon, they've got enough money to shoot 80-year-old former television stars into space, right? Like they're able to innovate incredibly quickly, and they're able to roll out changes and tweaks and modify things. They also hire an army of attorneys. They literally referred to their legal counsel in a National Labor Relations Board case that I'm working on as an army of attorneys. They're very, very good at threading that needle and finding ways that they can get away with things based on the legal landscape that exists today. So I think a lot of the policy that conversation that needs to be happening needs to really be rooted in understanding the lived experience of workers. And part of Make the Roads theory of change and my personal theory of change is like the people who need to be making these decisions need to be directly informed by the people who are living with the consequences of those decisions. And so, I think a big reason that people aren't more outraged is because people just don't know. People were up in arms when those news articles came out about the keystroke tracking on work from home computers. And the reality is Amazon workers in warehouses are dealing with, technology that is every bit as invasive as that on a day-to-day basis, and they have been. And people just don't know about it. And so I think that, informing people who are making decisions about what is happening is really important. But as of right now, without a very aggressive, broad-ranging, creative and well-informed policy approach to put a stop to some of these practices, we're just going to continue to see innovation and disruption of the workspace outpace legislation. And it's there's got to be a sort of like a seismic shift in the way that we approach these problems if we're actually going to put a stop to them.
And I should say, given their army of lawyers and in the interests of not being sued into oblivion ourselves, Amazon has denied many of these allegations in the past. Many of them are still actively being litigated. I personally believe many of them are true, but that is simply a belief and not a statement of fact. So, Ryan, we're talking a bit about the sort of public mobilization against abusive forms of workplace surveillance. Could you tell us a bit about some of the campaigns that have been taking place on the ground?
Yeah, I can start us off and then Strea can add. If we just think about actually, let me go back to the 1990s. Call center workers were among the early workers who were monitored digitally. And in the 90s, they started saying like, this is causing a problem for us. This is like a terrible low road business model. And they had Communications Workers of America conduct a study. That study was followed up by a government study. The findings were exactly what we described, that this pervasive surveillance causes injuries and anxiety. And so they put forward legislation at the federal level. And now corporations beat back that legislation and it was never enacted. And so we have this situation that Frank described where workers have no protections at all. And so just like fast forwarding, where you see the spread of this kind of predatory business model in, I think, 2018, workers outside of Minneapolis protested time off task, which is Amazon's like monitoring of every time you're not what they consider on task. There were similar protests in California and in Germany. So workers have been standing up against this for, this particular practice at Amazon, now going back years. And more recently, we've seen groups that fight police surveillance and police abuse lining up with workers and saying like, this is all part of the same system of control that oppresses poor people and people of color, whether it be in neighborhoods or at work. And I think that's really sort of opened up a new front. And Strea can talk more about, and Frank really too, about how workers are standing up right now against this.
Yes, please. It would be great to hear from both of you on that. Strea, maybe to you first.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've really been working on ending rate and TOT, and those are two things that are highly surveilled at Amazon. You are scored basically on how much you either pick, pack, stow, or whatever your quota is. And they want everybody to be above a certain rate. If you work in larger items, you may need to pick or stow 32 items an hour. If you're working in smaller items, they may want you to pick or stow at a rate of 85 an hour. And that's just the FC that I worked in. There's others where things are brought in and the rates are much higher, but it's a really huge issue, and being looked at on the basis of those, if you're in the lower like 5 or 10%, you can get written up, which is really unfair. I think if you're doing your personal best, you should not be concerned about being fired. And so we have been really working on ending rate and TOT. TOT is time off task, and anything like, I think it's over 6 minutes, they begin counting, and you only have 30 minutes a day of time off task you can use before a write-up. So if you're having a bad day and need to use the restroom a few times, if you've got a manager that doesn't like you, you can absolutely be written up and fired for that. And these things are just really creating issues for employees. And AB 701 was passed, which is a California initiative to actually prevent things like that from happening, having quotas used against you. I don't really want to go deep into that one, but rate and TOT are things that really affect employees. It's causing a lot of issue. And so we have been trying to end it for a long time.
Yeah, and I think connecting these issues with, racial justice issues around policing. Make the Road's been really involved in No Tech for ICE, which protests the use of facial, recognition technology at the border and this sort of like deportation machine. So, Amazon workers are facing very specific problems with rate, with TOT, and I think that building bigger coalitions of people and addressing these not as the individual problem of TOT, which is a very serious issue, but if Amazon comes out with TOT 2.0 that just sort of slightly evades the law that is attempting to shut it down, that it's just going to continue in perpetuity. So I think building sort of larger coalitions around sort of more like philosophical, ethical concerns about the use of technology is really important, so that we're not just talking about this specific tool that Amazon is using, but we're talking about surveillance technology in general, and connecting all of these different groups. Because if you have a protest of Amazon workers outside of a facility in Staten Island protesting unfair conditions in COVID-19, during COVID-19, probably not going to get a lot of press outside of the local Staten Island paper. But if you would bring in nurses and bus drivers and other people who are affected by similar conditions, that's when you start to build momentum, you start to gain attention. And so I think the connecting this to other issues is going to be really crucial to actually creating change for the lived experience of these warehouse workers.
And clearly solidarity, broad-based movements it's such a indispensable part of any successful push for change. And we've first off, before I go further, let me just invite the audience again. Please submit your questions. Would love to know what is top of mind for all of you, what questions you have about the way that this technology is being used, the way it can be fought, and the sort of state of things today. But we've been talking a lot about Amazon throughout, and I just wanted to ask, why do you think they've been such an outlier in this technology? Clearly all the technologies they're using, all the practices they're using, bits and pieces of it are found, throughout different industries, but they really, all of you have been focusing a lot of your work on this one company. I just wanted to ask, why do you think they became such a leader in this sort of worker surveillance? Why
Frank,
don't we
do you
go
want
with
to go?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm starting at the top of the alphabet. They're an A. I'm working my way. We'll get to Walmart eventually, but no, I think that they're a tech company, and they're a new tech company. So in the same way that like the way Tesla builds an automobile is different than the way General Motors does, I think that Amazon approached warehousing and logistics with a different attitude in mind. They're not trying to stock big box stores like a Walmart. They've got this sort of direct to home model, which requires a much more sophisticated logistics system. And the people who are developing it come from a tech background. So this idea of efficiency, I think, is really important to the way they've designed these systems. And so, whereas, Walmart, or a company that's, comes from sort of like earlier, longer legacies of warehousing, logistics, commerce, sort of built off of a different foundation. I think Amazon, the concept of like disruption was really important to the way that they set about doing this. And so I think that they've been really aggressive about developing systems that cut every possible corner. The other thing is their entire model relies on just sort of ruthless efficiency. And so they want to have, they don't want to have a single person working in a warehouse that they don't need. And so in order for that to work, they need to know everything that every individual person is doing at every time, so that they can, further streamline. So I think that's part of it. And then I think also, if this conversation finishes without at least mentioning the sort of, monopoly power of the corporation, right? I think the fact that they have Amazon Web Services, they have all of these other sort of branches and arms of their corporate empire, enables them and empowers them to use their incredible wealth to develop these systems that are much more much more powerful at overseeing workers, surveilling workers, and sort of managing that workforce. So I think that's a big part of it too.
And Ryan, did you want to add to that as well?
I think, as Frank said, their sort of innovation was to make shipping very fast. And really, other than that, like, you don't see, this isn't a radically different proposal. And so it's really like a huge amount of wealth built off being able to control, they're the second largest employer in the United States now and quickly becoming the first, able to control well over 1 million bodies and direct them toward their effort. And that's their real like value creation, is that speed. I mean, they have, other tech innovations, but if you look at their retail business, like, this is what it is. It's about leveraging huge amounts of workers who don't get paid fairly and directing them toward those tasks. And that's really like the niche that they saw and the gap that they sought to fill.
And as someone who got my start as an antitrust lawyer, to pick up on the thread frankly did about the scale of this company, I mean, it's really terrifying to me, just the amount of people they hire, the control they have over certain sectors, and not just as a monopoly in some cases, but as a monopsony, which is a fancy word as for the only game in town for a lot of people who want a job or want to sell their goods to in some ways. So if given that monopoly power, do you think there are ways that we can prevent these sorts of abuses that come up short of just breaking up the company, or is this, or is it sort of yes and that we need to break up Amazon and also have broader workplace protections?
So I'll start us off. I don't think anyone's going to say we fix it with one piece of legislation or one regulatory action, because, if we look at Amazon, they have amassed a huge amount of power over us, over our democracy, over our economy, using a bunch of different levers. And in a way, like when you're sort of saying like, why Amazon, if you don't think that surveillance is about power and control over your behavior because you're like, well, I have this Alexa and it seems harmless, like look at how it's deployed in a warehouse. And this is the same company. And so if we're sort of trying to unpack their power, we see like workers should have rights in the workplace. They should not be injured at work. They shouldn't be continuously monitored. They shouldn't be in a cycle of being monitored and disciplined. Like those should be like basic rights in this country if we want to have an economy where basically people are able to thrive. So, in addition to antitrust protections, which would protect us from like unbridled corporate power, unlimited mergers, unlimited control of markets, we need worker protections, we need tax policy that doesn't let corporations like aggregate all the country's wealth into the pockets of like one guy going off into space, as Frank mentioned. So I think like there's a whole set of things, not to mention data privacy laws banning face recognition and biometrics data collection. Like, so Amazon's not just doing one thing that's disturbing, like we have to take care of the whole set of things.
So true to their theme of being the everything store, they're the everything dystopia. All the concerns wrapped into one. Strea, or what about you? What is your thought on this?
Yeah, so I don't have like an answer on how to fix it, and I think that's what we've all been working towards. It's definitely about control and power and money and how much production they can take from people. There's also the fact that they are surveilling our neighborhoods, our communities. I mean, you name it, they are mixed up in it, and it's a huge problem. Other companies are seeing the way Amazon's modeling things, and it's causing issues because they're wanting to run their companies the same way. They see efficiency there. And so other employees are going to be monitored and scrutinized the way Amazon employees are. And unless we fix it now, things are only going to get worse. Being part of that and talking to people on a daily basis that are having issues with Amazon, it's crazy, the damage that the surveillance can do. I met a couple people who were severely depressed, people who quit, people who were fired because of the surveillance, and just all of the aspects that go into Amazon. And as far reaching as they are, people are really afraid to speak out because of how many areas Amazon reaches to. So I don't know the answer to how to fix it, but we definitely need to before it gets any worse.
I can
Please,
jump
Frank.
in and I can share my my solution. So look, I think breaking them up would be a good step in the right direction, but I don't think that that's realistically going to happen anytime soon. I try to be optimistic as much as possible. And, as much as the COVID-19 pandemic gave us an opportunity to reevaluate work-life balance, the way, the places we live in, the communities we live in, I have increasingly started to see Amazon as it is so big and so powerful that it actually gives us a chance to rethink the way that we want to structure government regulation of capitalism in this country. It is so big that trying to contend with the scale of Amazon forces us to rethink the way that we structure employment in the country. And so, I think that any sort of response to Amazon is necessarily going to require us to, any response that actually helps solve these problems is going to have to contend with a lot of things that have been calcifying in our government regulation of corporations and in the way that we let companies just run roughshod over the rights of people. So, I think it's a huge problem, but it creates a huge opportunity to really change the way that we approach worker rights and, consumer rights and, privacy rights and environmental rights. And so, I think de-siloing all of these regulatory bodies, de-siloing all of these enforcement mechanisms, having them start to have conversations with one another about the way that the monopolistic and monopsonistic powers of a company like Amazon have real impacts on worker health and safety, have real impacts on the cost of living in communities, right? Like all of these are interconnected. And so by beginning to have these different, conversations across different spaces, I think it gives us the ability to start to imagine responses that are actually, commensurate with the scale of the problem. And there is hope in that is exciting. It's something that we've needed to do for a long time, and in the same way that, if aliens arrived or a meteor was coming to the earth, you would start to see the factionalization between different peoples break down. This is a huge opponent that everybody is facing, and so we're going to have to start to find better ways to work together to stand up to them. So there is some optimism there.
Well, that's exactly what the pro-meteor lobby would want us to think, but I think that is a really good point. That it really, a lot of these things are easy to dismiss as speculative, as abstract, until they reach the point of severity that you can't ignore the problem anymore, that you can't ignore the harm that's being done. One thing I wanted to ask, I see we have a couple of questions in the queue. Thank you for those. We'll get to those in a minute. Please keep them coming. A lot of the technology seems not just invasive, not just biased. A lot of it seems really bad. There are a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of technology that's there that claims to monitor how good a job you're doing and can't do anything of the sort. And I just wanted to have you speak a bit to that, just the errors we see with these tools, and also the broader question of why are companies installing tools that do get it wrong as often as they do? Because I think it really, it's perplexing to see from the outside. Happy to go with anyone to start that one off. Ryan, over to you.
Do you want to? I mean, Strea has these great stories about how wrong Amazon's tracking and monitoring can be. I wondered if you want to share any of those.
I would love to. People are getting fired over things that like they didn't do, things that maybe they did do, but were misconstrued on camera. We see a lot of things happening when it comes to the surveillance of employees, when it comes to all the tracking. They don't necessarily care enough about their employees to give that same service that they do to customers. Customers number one, great, but how great are your customers going to be served when your employees are quitting on you? When people have been fired and people are angry and people are tired of putting up with all the things that Amazon is doing. People have taken time off for COVID and they have been fired by the computer because somebody didn't put their information in right. And I remember keeping track of my rate at one point to see what I was pulling a day, and it was pretty high, and what was coming up elsewhere, what the computer was reporting was quite a bit lower. So I was noticing discrepancies there as well. But I just don't think that Amazon has the same care for their employees that they have for their customers. And that's why they use things that are not really all that great. Their technology doesn't have to be perfect because they just think they can randomly fire, hire, and go through that over and over again for as long as they want. But I think, like, as they're seeing now, eventually they're going to run out of people because this can only go on for so long the way it is. You know, I have many stories that could take up a very long time, but I mean, basically that's what it is it's things that are being read wrong or seen wrong or just not given the correct attention, and it's really causing issues for the employees, and they have no need to fix it because the employees are not the customers. And when it comes down to it, the employees are the customers because a lot of people, even though they work there, still buy from Amazon. But until you're actually the customer, they just don't care. So, you know, that's creating a huge issue, and they just don't pay attention enough to what's going on with the employees to really, for it to really matter.
I mean, it's so Kafkaesque. You have this world in which these unseen systems are tracking everything you do, making a judgment about how well you're doing it, getting it wrong, punishing you for it. And then when you try to complain, they're completely opaque and inaccessible. And, you know, all of it, I mean, it just seems like a recipe for disaster that, you know, it's, you know, they may have an army of lawyers willing to defend these things in court, but it doesn't sound like they have an army of quality assurance folks actually making sure that this technology does what it's supposed to in the first place. All right, well, Ryan.
I was just going to jump in. I mean, I think, you know, you can sort of look at how public policy steers corporations in this direction in some ways. Like, if high turnover, if it's just incredibly cheap to fire people, offload them to unemployment or workers' comp, and you have systems where you can hire them on, there's no training at all. I mean, actually within Amazon, their sort of training and disciplinary model are one and the same. Like, you immediately start getting warned, and then you might get some pointers along the way, but that's like the training that you get. So when you have this system where there's really no cost for corporations to be firing people at this rate, then they really just don't have to care. And it's their model. And so, you know, if they have technology that's not very correct, you know, it's just like a small cost. And I think, you know, we probably see similar things with hiring algorithms, which are just notoriously flawed, like not only discriminatory, but just bad. And I think, you know, corporations have made the assessment that they're not going to hire enough employees to do like proper vetting and training and coaching. Instead, they're just going to have this model of high turnover. And it's in some ways the most extreme in the case of gig workers, you know, where just wrong all the time and people are deplatformed. But, you know, in this country, there's like a huge supply of people who are just going to take whatever they can get because it's the only thing that they can get under the system.
And I just real quick, I will also say that I think that, you know, that's part of the model, right? They've publicly stated that their model is, you know, you're not supposed to work at an Amazon warehouse for very long. And so the systems are, I think, intentionally designed to chew people up and spit people out. I compare it a lot to, like, you know, the benches that have the bars down the middle so people can't sleep on them, or the curbs that, or the windowsills that have spikes so people can't sit. It's anti-humanist systems design specifically made to infuriate workers, so that if they have, you know, a claim for accommodation or for workers' compensation or any of these other things, you know, leave, sick leave, family leave, the system that you have to interact with to try to access that is just so opaque that you will spend however many hours you're willing to spend of your own personal time fighting it, give up and go away. And then Amazon doesn't have to deal with you as an individual. They can deal with you as, employee number, whatever your your code is, right? There's a dehumanization of it that's baked into the system. And I think it's, we know they're good at designing technology, because for me to buy something on Amazon, it is completely seamless, so easy. There is customer service to help me enter my credit card information to buy things, right? If they wanted to build a system that worked, they could. So the fact that they haven't, I think it's safe to connect the dots and say, like, the reason is because it's cheaper for them and more efficient for them to not have to deal with leave requests, accommodation requests, injury problems, all of these things. So they build systems that confuse people, confound people, don't actually work, and then spit people back out. And then, hey, but the good news is 4 to 6 months later, you can reapply and come back again, right? Like there's that, that's part of the model. So
I completely agree. I mean, and I think that analogy to, a purposefully inaccessible, unusable architecture is really a powerful one. All right, let's switch to the questions. And, again, please feel free to submit your own using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So the first question comes from Amanda. Where are you seeing the Amazonification of workplaces, surveillance spread beyond the last mile logistics? Are other warehouses using these tools? So, you've talked about, Amazon being sort of a sign of what is to come. Well, where else do you already see that as a reality? Happy to have anyone field this first. Yeah, Ryan? Why are we Ryan and then Frank?
Well, I think, we see there's intense competition, and employers, corporations are racing against each other toward the lowest road possible in this case. As I noted, Walmart recently started to give its associates smartphones. And if you read the description of like what the smartphones would do, it was about making associates more efficient in their jobs. And like, you can read through the lines and understand what that's going to mean. So I think, and as more online ordering has gone to in-store picking, the people who are picking the items from the store, so when you're doing like in-person pickup, those folks are monitored and timed. And so we see is like we have new jobs and sort of a transformation of retail. That transformation is falling in line with this kind of thinking, which allows you to extract the maximum amount of effort out of workers to their peril.
And I really do think that it's kind of stunning when you think about it, that, the neighborhood supermarket has been transformed into a fulfillment center in a lot of cases, that you have this layer of surveillance and direction being mapped on, grafted on top of existing infrastructure. It shows just how easily it can spread. Frank, over to you.
Yeah, in terms of like temporal tracking, fast food restaurants, there's the clock that starts once you make your order, and that's been around for a while. But looking at Instacart, Fresh Direct, shoppers that are gig workers, there's times that are tracking the amount of time you're there. New York, there was an article in the New York Times today about this new 15-minute grocery delivery service, which sounds like just an absolute nightmare for the fulfillment side of that equation. And you see like gig workers that are doing, Grubhub, Uber, tracking locations and things like that. The surveillance is there. The thing that I worry about is, the back end, right? The brain behind all of it that takes, the input of productive work and then spits out the output of, thumbs up or thumbs down based on each individual worker. So, what happens if, the technology grows to the place where I can, I have a construction site and have cameras set up, and those cameras are able to determine if somebody is working or not. And if they're not working, they're going to get fired. So now I've got construction workers that are trying to like increase their speed, increase their rate, increase their productivity, injuries are going to spike there, right? Like some of this is speculative, but I think that the trend is towards monitoring as a way to sort of wring as much productivity out of human beings as possible, and even beyond what is possible, to the point where you've got people just completely breaking, bodies breaking. I think you can start to see it trickle in places here and there, but the thing that I worry about is when there's a leap from the relatively controlled space of Amazon into the real world. Once that technology is able to understand productive time and unproductive time, running it through that algorithm to determine which workers are going to get fired, you're going to see the same sort of emotional toll and physical toll on workers beyond the Amazon warehouse.
And we do see attempts at this in almost every aspect of the remote workplace. We see Microsoft having remote productivity tools, a lot of other platforms having it. And one of the things that we know from the social science literature, we're really bad at actually measuring productivity. We measure very simple things and then round it up to what is called productivity. And oftentimes we can't even measure those simple things well. But productivity is such a nuanced concept, because if you're measuring the rate at which you're doing X or Y, you'll just do more of that. But oftentimes, like you were saying, Frank, with disastrous results. All right, we have one more question. I definitely have time for it. This one comes from Sahar. Can you list some ways that employers can monitor us, especially while working from home? I know about keystroke monitoring, but what about apps we are asked to download onto our personal phones, which Sahar refuses to do? How far can it go? Can they see our cameras or listen to us when our computers are on? Dealing with an anti-union boss right now after recently unionizing. So who wants to go down this particularly disturbing series of questions?
I'm happy to take a first stab at it. So congratulations on your recent unionization. That's very exciting. We all, or hopefully we've all seen Citizen4, right? Like our cameras, our technology, like listening can happen. When I'm having conversations with clients about particularly sensitive things related to Amazon, I do the check to make sure that they've got their Alexa unplugged and things like that, right? Like, the technology can listen to you. The question is, like, how far are companies willing to go to sort of drill down and into it? So I think, like an app on your phone, check and see if it's doing the location tracking, right? Like that's one thing that I do with workers who have apps on their phones. Is it tracking whether or not that person is coming into an attorney's office or meeting with other people who have the same location services turned on? We know there was an incredible map that came out, or an image that came out, based on data that was made public from one of the running apps. And it actually, people were able to go in and see very specifically what the space of very, very top secret military bases looked like, because of the fact that those people were using this technology to track their runs, right? So, the amount of data that we're just hemorrhaging into the universe is pretty large. And so, even for an employer, they don't necessarily need to install the keystroke monitoring software or turn on your phone microphone to listen to your conversations. Like, we're spitting a bunch of data out there. So I think that's just something that I'm always, I'm not like staying up at night, curled up in the corner or anything like that, but I think it's just recognizing that the technology that we have is able to collect a lot of information about us.
And I would just add that, it's not just a technical issue, it's a legal issue that, I'm going through the process of finalizing an employee handbook for S.T.O.P. And the default text we got from our outside counsel suggested that we have a policy of being able to monitor anything our employees do on their computers at any time, anyway, install whatever we want, use it however we want. And that's the norm in a lot of companies in the United States, and that's perfectly permissible. So, we do see people being coerced to sign consent forms that say that your webcam can be used by your employer to monitor you at work. We do see people having, those microphones turned on. And we do see employers even breaking the law to go beyond what's legally permissible, as bad as that is. So, yes, the technology is scary, powerful, and yes, the law is very lax, but hopefully can be fixed. So Ryan, quickly to you, and then we'll give everyone a moment for final thoughts.
Well, just in this case, like the word of hope is that you recently unionized, and this is a thing you should bargain over, and establish that you can't be monitored at home. And then, obviously all workers should have those rights, and we should enshrine them in law.
Yep, and we will be publishing our employee manual soon, just so everyone can have a template of what a privacy protective employee manual looks like, so in case you need a template. All right, well, I know we've gone over a lot of terrifying dystopian, out of this world, bad sci-fi movie plot type of topics tonight, but I just wanted to ask that before we go, what is one scene, one image, one moment, one breakthrough from recent years that gives you hope about the trajectory of this fight in the years to come? And why don't we reverse the usual order and start with Frank, and then Strea, and then Ryan?
So, I think part of the reason that I ended up in labor and employment law is because I see organizing around class as a really powerful way to affect change. And I think that the spike in interest in worker organizing and in worker unionization, the increasing use of strikes is really exciting. And I think you're seeing a lot of Amazon workers getting on board with worker organizing, whether in a union context or not. So I think the thing that gives me hope is, labor is starting to wake up a little bit, and that's exciting.
Very exciting. And Strea, over to you.
Yeah, so I've kind of got the same thing going on that Frank does. Seeing the workers actually step up and demand better treatment, and just really starting to organize for better workplace. That really brings me hope. I think it's very much needed, and as an organizer, I've seen so much fear and so much terror before COVID that has actually, once it became life and death, there was not so much of that fear any longer. So seeing people step up and actually fight for better workplaces and better treatment, like that's really given me a lot of hope.
And over to you, Ryan.
Just to bring it back to something Frank said, I think that, people finding that they're in this fight, a broader fight together, that the fight of Amazon workers and warehouses is linked to the fight against police surveillance in cities where Amazon has police contracts, or cities where Amazon wants police contracts, that immigration groups that are fighting tech corporations who are aligned with detention and deportation are seeing a joint fight with delivery drivers. I think there's really a lot of hope in that.
Definitely. And thank you all for both the those closing notes of hope and for all of the terrifying realities that came before it. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done in these campaigns, but a lot of reasons to believe that workers and the public will actually be able to triumph. So thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back next month for our next installment of the RadTech series. And thank you again to our amazing panel for tonight's discussion. Be well.